Picture the sheer horror. For up to half a minute after her head was cleanly separated, medical history suggests the victim may still be aware. Eyes can dart, the lips might involuntarily move, and a terrifying, final consciousness fights for survival as life drains away. This gruesome, unimaginable phenomenon was the probable fate of Anne Boleyn, the ill-fated second Queen of Henry VIII. While sanitized history focuses on the quick swing of the blade, the true horror lies in the psychological warfare waged against her in the days leading up to it. Anne's execution was not simply a death sentence, it was the chilling conclusion of Tudor England's most meticulously staged humiliation. Though historical records cite treason, her final weeks were a masterpiece of mental deconstruction, a process so refined it predates modern torture manuals. Her demise was the final stroke in Henry VIII's ruthless campaign to eliminate a woman whose influence had become a profound threat to his agenda. By May 19, 1536, Anne had already endured 17 claustrophobic days imprisoned within the Tower of London, a stark contrast to the fortress's welcoming halls where she had prepared for her coronation just 3 years earlier. Facing death, she was deliberately held in a torturous limbo, as Henry VIII heartlessly prolonged her mental agony by constantly postponing the execution date. The king even imported a renowned swordsman from Calais to perform the decapitation, forsaking the crude English axe. This detail is often presented as an act of royal mercy, but it merely served to underscore the grotesque theatricality of the impending state execution. Despite the unbearable tension, witnesses noted Anne's bizarrely composed demeanor. She was described by onlookers as light-hearted while facing her death. A modern psychological interpretation suggests this was dissociation, a defense mechanism triggered by extreme mental trauma. Anne allegedly employed dark gallows humor, even referring to herself as une sans tête, one without a head, revealing a fractured and overwhelmed emotional state beneath the surface. Historians often fail to grasp the intensity of the terror she must have felt, knowing her reputation was being systematically annihilated by completely fabricated charges of incest, adultery, and plotting the king's death. What truly distinguishes Anne Boleyn's end is not the physical beheading, but the calculated annihilation of her public identity. Henry VIII didn't just want Anne dead, he aimed to erase her legacy, discredit her triumphs, and permanently invalidate the legitimacy of her daughter, Elizabeth. The execution acted as the brutal climax of a relentless defamation effort, designed to convince the English public that their former queen deserved this grim fate. Before her death, Anne was subjected to scandalous, fictitious narratives detailing shocking sexual misconduct, allegations so baseless that any modern court would dismiss them immediately. The dawn of May 19th brought an ironically bright London sky, sharply contrasting with the dreadful events about to unfold. Anne spent her last night sleepless, resorting to fervent prayer. Tower records confirm she requested the sacrament at 2 a.m., kneeling for hours in desperate communion. By the morning light, she had been awake for close to 24 hours, her mental state surely ravaged by exhaustion and extreme stress. When the lieutenant of the tower arrived, Anne was reportedly found laughing with her few remaining attendants, a reaction that suggests a state of psychological breakdown rather than noble serenity. Her execution had been continually rescheduled, a frequently overlooked tool of psychological torture used to crush the prisoner's will. The deliberate uncertainty surrounding the hour of death was a purposeful weapon. Upon hearing the summons, Anne was led from her cell along the same corridors she had walked as a queen 3 years prior. Now, guards ensured she couldn't escape, while courtiers, who once bowed deeply, observed her final walk with cold, calculated detachment. The scaffold erected on Tower Green was strikingly low, standing only 3 feet above the earth, unlike the towering platforms frequently seen in period dramas. This deliberate architectural choice meant Anne had to ascend minimal steps, denying her the dignity of height and forcing her closer to the faces of the mocking onlookers. Historical accounts describe the atmosphere not as a solemn execution, but as a vibrant, carnival-like public event, intentionally manufactured to maximize the spectacle. The execution served as a grim public warning against those who dared to defy the king's absolute power. particularly women who transcended their assigned social rank. Before kneeling, Anne was granted the customary opportunity to deliver a final speech, a moment rooted in tradition, not mercy. Her words, precisely calibrated for survival, demonstrated her fierce political acumen despite her desperate circumstances. "Good people, I have come here to die. For according to the law, I am condemned to die, and so I will say nothing against it." This apparent acceptance was, in fact, her final, masterful act of defiance. By upholding the law while simultaneously refusing to admit guilt, she cast a subtle, yet profound shadow of doubt over the legitimacy of the treason charges. Perhaps the most unsettling element was the king's calculated absence. In stark contrast to royal custom, Henry VIII did not attend. He stayed comfortably at Whitehall Palace, awaiting swift confirmation of Anne's death. As the blade ended her life, Henry was reportedly already celebrating his imminent marriage to Jane Seymour, symbolizing how utterly disposable Anne had become. Her personal tragedy was merely a political transaction, a necessary hurdle in the king's relentless pursuit of a male heir. The hiring of a foreign, highly paid Calais swordsman added another layer of calculated brutality. English beheadings typically required clumsy, multiple axe blows. This Frenchman was procured specifically for his skill in delivering a single, clean strike. Anne would face death at the hands of a complete stranger, enduring one last alienation as the once adored Queen of England. The widely accepted notion of a blindfold as a merciful act is deceptive. Its practical purpose was far more crucial: to immobilize Anne's head and prevent any last-second movement that could compromise the executioner's single, perfect stroke. Against popular belief, Anne knelt upright, a challenging French tradition, rather than resting her head on a block. This posture demanded absolute stillness, forcing her to maintain composure through sheer willpower. Witnesses later recounted her lips moving in prayer, her eyes subtly shifting beneath the silk in a desperate attempt to hear the approach of the hidden blade. This agonizing anticipation, unacknowledged in sanitized histories, was a true form of psychological torture. The beheading was, by Tudor standards, remarkably clean. However, the immediate aftermath, often omitted from polite historical accounts, is horrifying. Witnesses claimed Anne's eyes and mouth continued to twitch for several agonizing seconds after decapitation, a ghastly biological reaction as brain tissue fought for oxygen. Some even suggested her lips tried to form words, perhaps finishing a prayer that the sword violently interrupted. The disturbing scene caused several observers to faint, while others recoiled in disgust at this stark boundary between body and soul. Most tellingly, no fitting coffin had been prepared for Anne's body. Her traumatized court ladies were forced to scramble and locate a rudimentary chest to contain her severed head and remains. This staggering oversight highlights the ultimate contempt for the former queen's dignity. Even in death, she was not a person deserving of basic funeral rites, but merely a political issue that had been resolved. Anne was hastily interred in an unadorned grave beneath the Tower Chapel. The king's resolution to erase her memory extended beyond her demise. Court painters were ordered to destroy her likenesses, her royal symbols were aggressively chiseled from palace stone, and courtiers quickly learned that even whispering her name could incur severe royal displeasure. We often focus solely on the act of death, yet the king's wholesale effort to erase Anne's memory was a profound form of post-mortem violence, a determined campaign to extinguish not just her life, but her entire legacy. For centuries, historians struggled to reconstruct Anne's life from the scattered fragments left behind after Henry's meticulous purge. Anne's execution left deep, invisible scars on those forced to witness it, especially her ladies-in-waiting. These women, terrified of being implicated in the Queen's fabricated crimes, were tragically tasked with the ghastly duty of cleaning and preparing her decapitated head for burial, while maintaining a composed exterior. Records indicate many suffered nightmares for years afterward, with at least one attendant eventually seeking refuge in a convent, unable to cope with the trauma of court life after the horrific spectacle. The wave of psychological terror cast a shadow of fear over Henry's court that lingered throughout his reign. The punishment did not stop with the Queen. Immediately following the execution, Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, a child not yet 3 years old, was officially declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession. This child, who would one day become England's most celebrated queen, was abruptly abandoned, her mother murdered and her father publicly revoking her birthright. Court documents reveal Elizabeth's household was swiftly dismantled, leaving her suddenly without adequate attendance or suitable attire. The calculated cruelty meted out to the innocent child further underscores the grotesque nature of Anne's punishment. Modern depictions rarely convey the overwhelming sensory impact of a Tudor execution. The scaffold area would have been soaked with the blood of previous victims, buzzing with flies in the May heat. The orchestrated uproar of the crowd, fueled by planted loyalists cheering the Queen's demise, created a terrifying wall of noise designed to disorient and break the prisoner. As Anne approached Tower Green, she heard this din growing louder, mingling with the jeers and taunts from a public systematically conditioned to view her as an adulteress and sorceress. This intentional public shaming was fundamental to Tudor justice. Death alone was not deemed enough, humiliation was required. Pop culture often portrays Anne's final address as a moment of noble defiance, but the truth is far darker. Anne Boleyn's carefully chosen words, praising the king as a benevolent ruler, were a tragic reflection of her impossible situation. Under the direct threat of death, she was incapable of speaking freely. Her speech was strictly constrained by concern for her daughter's future and the watchful eyes of the state. Her words did not represent freedom of speech, they represented its ultimate suppression. The final act of a woman who understood that even her dying utterance would be scrutinized by the king. The sword imported from France symbolized the entire theatrical nature of her execution. Henry staged the event to be a precise spectacle befitting a queen's downfall. The executioner, rumored to have practiced on animals to guarantee the single perfect stroke, was motivated by a generous payment. This calculated professionalism, reducing Anne's death to a technical hurdle, highlights the profound depersonalization inherent in state-sanctioned murder. Anne wasn't just executed, her death was a meticulously engineered piece of political propaganda. Contemporary records suggest no English executioner was willing or trained to carry out the act. The French sword demanded a specific technique, sharpened and balanced for a swift horizontal strike, unlike the downward force of an English axe. This technical detail underscores the profound, dramatic essence of Anne's death. Even her method of execution was chosen for maximum psychological impact and minimal visual mess. It was poet Thomas Wyatt, himself a prisoner in the Tower and forced to watch the death of the woman he once revered, who penned the elegy about the little throat that had been adorned with countless jewels. The poetic lament of Thomas Wyatt, imprisoned in the Tower and forced to witness the spectacle, captures the haunting reality. The gruesome metamorphosis of Anne from a jewel-adorned queen to an objectified corpse. The executioner, as was the custom, lifted the linen-wrapped head high by the hair, a final, horrific gesture to confirm the sentence was complete. This public exhibition, with blood still actively flowing from severed arteries, left an indelible, sickening visual upon the spectators. Tower records suggest Anne's remains were hastily interred, entirely stripping her of proper Christian burial rites. Her body and severed head, placed within an unadorned chest, were dumped beneath the chapel floor alongside other executed traitors. This marked a disgraceful, final end for a crowned queen. For centuries, Anne Boleyn's precise burial site remained unmarked and undetermined, symbolizing the chilling pinnacle of Henry's effort to erase her. Not just from life, but from the historical record. His endeavor to annihilate her legacy disturbingly neared success. In the aftermath, Henry's propagandists immediately went to work, furiously manipulating public perception. Poets who had previously celebrated Anne's grace and intellect suddenly penned verses condemning her as a cunning adulteress. Official records subtly accentuated the king's mercy in granting a skilled swordsman, reinterpreting Henry's calculated theatrical decision as thoughtful compassion. The horrific reality of the execution was systematically cleansed from all official documents, initiating a long process of historical revisionism that still taints our understanding of Anne's last moments. The king's swift return to normalcy is perhaps the most troubling aspect of this saga. Henry VIII formally engaged Jane Seymour the very day after Anne's beheading and married his third wife just 2 weeks later in a subdued ceremony. This shocking speed confirms that Anne's execution was merely a convenient remedy for a political problem. Having failed to deliver a male heir, she was swiftly discarded and replaced, with absolutely no regard for her suffering or the tragedy of her death. The psychological torment endured by Anne extended far beyond the scaffold. In the weeks prior to her death, she was subjected to relentless interrogation, sleep deprivation, and isolation. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister who orchestrated her downfall, employed methods strikingly similar to modern psychological torment: isolation, stress, and the deployment of misinformation. By the time Anne reached the scaffold, her mental resistance had been systematically shattered, ensuring she would not offer any formidable final protest against the king. Historical accounts reveal unprecedented security measures for Anne's execution, far exceeding those typically reserved for high-ranking traitors. The Tower garrison was doubled, not to prevent escape, but to bar any sympathizers from staging an intervention or inciting public opposition. This extravagant display of force was designed to instill absolute fear and compel silent submission to the king's decree. Furthermore, scheduling the execution during mid-morning rather than the usual dawn hour guaranteed maximum attendance from Londoners. This ensured Anne's personal agony was transformed into a city-wide political spectacle. A key, frequently disregarded aspect involves the fate of her co-defendants. 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn, were beheaded just days before the Queen. Their executions were strategically timed to solidify the fabricated evidence of Anne's supposed crimes, eliminating any chance their final words could contradict the official storyline, an act of state-sponsored violence that bears a chilling parallel to later-era show trials. The judicially orchestrated massacre of 6 individuals, convicted on what was essentially manufactured evidence, stands as one of Tudor England's most brazen acts of state violence. The speed and political precision of these executions, which included Anne's own brother, chillingly prefigure the brutality of Stalin's later show trials. Even the geography of terror remains inconsistent. While a modern memorial marks one spot, historical records suggest the scaffold was elsewhere. This geographical discrepancy perfectly symbolizes how Anne's demise has been repeatedly reinterpreted and relocated throughout history to suit prevailing narratives. The sanitized, romanticized version of her death that permeates pop culture bears almost no resemblance to the cold, calculated cruelty, character assassination, and psychological torment that defined May 1536. Anne Boleyn's execution is terrifying, not just for the decapitation, but because it represents a total attempt to obliterate a woman who dared to become too powerful for the established order. She wasn't merely executed, her reputation was shredded, her triumphs minimized, and her very existence nearly purged from official memory. A scrutiny of her final weeks reveals a horror far more unsettling than the French swordsman's quick strike. It is the portrait of state-approved gaslighting and public character assassination. The charges leveled against her, including incest with her brother and plotting to poison the king, were so profoundly absurd they would be dismissed in any contemporary courtroom. Yet, through the skillful manipulation of public emotion, the judicious use of torture to secure false confessions from co-defendants, and absolute control over every official narrative, Henry's administration successfully convinced the populace that Anne deserved her fate. The most bone-chilling facet of her entire ordeal is the deliberate annihilation of truth itself. 500 years later, the tragedy of Anne Boleyn remains captivating due to its flawless blend of personal calamity and state-level political strategy. Her death was not simply the conclusion of a life, but a meticulously engineered spectacle intended to legitimize a king's ruthless actions and permanently alter historical perception. The true dread is not found in the final drop of the blade, but in the chilling comprehension of how absolutely power can manufacture and rewrite reality. This is a terrifying lesson that echoes ominously in our modern age, dominated by information control and character defamation. Anne's final, profound sadness is that while Henry strived to erase her life, it was her horrific death that ultimately became her lasting, inescapable impact. The raw reality of her execution forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about absolute power, the subjugation of gender, and the shaping of history. Her severed head, therefore, stands as a cautionary tale, the ultimate symbol of truth's heartbreaking vulnerability in the face of tyranny. History is not a distant past, it's a mirror. The story of Anne Boleyn isn't just a tragedy buried in Tudor England. It's a warning that power, when unchecked, can twist truth into whatever shape it desires. Her story reminds us that reputations can be destroyed faster than lives, and that silence in the face of injustice is the greatest cruelty of all. Every century, someone like Anne is erased, not by swords, but by lies, manipulation, and the rewriting of truth. The same machinery that once crushed her still exists today, wearing new faces, new systems, and new tools. We may not stand before a scaffold, but we live surrounded by invisible ones, where reputations, voices, and even entire histories are executed in silence.
If this story moved you, if you believe forgotten voices deserve to be remembered, and if you think truth should never be buried beneath the propaganda of power, then you're already part of what dark page of history stands for. Subscribe to our channel, not just to watch, but to witness, to uncover the hidden, the silenced, and the uncomfortable truths that shaped our world. Each view, each like, each subscription gives life to the forgotten, bringing justice to stories history tried to erase. Because history does not belong to kings or conquerors, it belongs to those who remember. So join us, hit subscribe, and let's turn forgotten pain into eternal remembrance.